Welcome back. In the previous weeks, we have studied the effects media have on audience, and we discussed several theoretical models of how this happens. Our view of audience now evolved from primarily passive to a view of active audiences, and now to prosumers, consumers who are also active producers of content. What we can draw from this is that, as Hobbes says, media messages are constructions. They're constructed by individuals and organizations with specific purposes. Media messages have economic and political contexts. They are constructed within economic and political contexts, which impact on how they are created, the preferred meaning of such messages, and the way they are decoded and understood by audiences. Individuals negotiate meaning in media text. Audiences actively engage in the process of decoding meaning and of negotiating the meaning of these texts. We're interested how both the medium, as McClone explained it, and the content, as the board's spectacle, communicate messages and spread ideologies. To understand this communication, we need to understand our audiences. Initially, we theorized audiences as passive, like Lasswell's hypodermic needle or Gerbner's cultivation theory, but now we consider active audiences explained by Stewart Hall's encoding and decoding as prosumers. Media tell stories. Stories are told as narratives, and so narrative is how the story is told. Narrative is also theorized as being character-driven, as we have seen in props characters. And as Thornham and Purvis said, narratives can inform versions of the past and have the power to shape how the present might be understood in relation to them. Today we talk about the representation theory. What do we mean by representation? Representation is how media texts deal with and present gender, age, ethnicity, national and regional identity, social issues and events to an audience. Media texts have the power to shape an audience's knowledge and understanding about these important topics. This makes them very powerful in terms of influencing ideas and attitudes. Stewart Hall's representation theory explains that there is no true representation of people or events in a text, but there are lots of ways these can be represented. So producers try to fix a meaning or a way of understanding people, events in their text. Representation is not about whether the media reflects or distorts reality, as this implies that there can be one true meaning, but the many meanings a representation can generate. Meaning is constituted by representation, by what is present, what is absent, and what is different. Thus, meaning can be contested. A representation implicates the audience in creating its meaning. Hal offers an extended mediation on representation, moving beyond the accuracy or inaccuracy of specific representations. Hal argues that the process of representation itself constitutes the very world it aims to represent, and explores how the shared language of a culture, its signs and images, provides a conceptual roadmap that gives meaning to the world rather than simply reflecting it. Hal's concern throughout is the centrality of culture to the shaping of our collective perceptions and how the dynamics of media representation reproduce forms of symbolic power. We routinely make sense of the world using types, broad categories of things with common characteristics. This allows us to categorize things in a meaningful way, and in turn draw conclusions and consume information about something based on previous experience of things of the same or similar type. This is commonly done with people and is not by definition negative. For example, we assign certain traits to roles such as parent, businessperson, pensioner, and so on. Stereotypes, on the other hand, while classifying people in a similar manner, reduce the person to those simplified and exaggerated characteristics, admit no possibility of change, and insist that these characteristics are natural. Any complexity is ignored and denied, and it is implied that everything that is necessary to know about the person can be known by referring to the traits of the stereotype. In essence, a stereotype declares this is what you are and this is all you are. If we look at the way the narrative around America has been constructed for a long time before 9/11, the global perspective was that America is the good guy, and there is a great sense of pride in being America. American media during and after 9/11 have represented America as both victim and hero at the same time. That is why there was support in what the US did afterwards. The attack broke the myth of America being strong and invincible, and that the American people was untouchable, especially on their own soil. 9/11 also constructed a new narrative about terrorists. The way we view terrorists now is quite different from the way audience viewed terrorists before 9/11. Before 9/11, terrorists were Palestinians, though Arab countries referred to their dead as martyrs and their militias as freedom fighters. World's media portrayed them as terrorists. This view have changed after 9/11. Terrorists have become Islamist militants in any world country. As Benzei puts it, a stereotype is a biased assessment of a person, group, or idea. The term is applied typically to describe the expectations that people have of others according to their age, gender, physical appearance, ethnic group, race, or occupation. Stereotypes are oversimplified assessments applied as generalizations constituting a form of biased prejudgment. Things we see and hear every day, like women are the weaker sex, blondes are dumb, etc., these are all stereotypes. If you look at this slide, you can find here some stereotypes. Boomers, millennials, and Gen X are all defined by generations and filled with stereotypes. Like boomers, for example, though it represents the generation of people that were born in the 2 decades following World War II, the perceived meaning for it is narrow-mindedness or based on outdated notions. The same goes for millennials and Gen X. These things are constructed in media and we see them mediated and remediated in media. Like in memes, for example, they remediate these things by sharing them and telling the story over and over again. They are reinforcing them. These stereotypes come from somewhere, and this somewhere is most likely the media. Images, myths, and ideas around different peoples are fed to us by the media, and we develop stereotypical views based upon this. Anytime a producer of a text tries to fix a meaning of a person or event, this will usually reveal viewpoints and bias, political or otherwise. Usually, newspapers attempt to demonize groups of people. However, anti-stereotypical representation also tries to fix meanings too. So these groups of people who are demonized in some papers might be presented as heroic in others, like the case with Palestinians, which leads us to the understanding that not all stereotypes are bad. There are some good stereotypes, like the ones about heroes. They still count as stereotypes because they oversimplify the complexity of human nature and they generalize that oversimplification over a group of people. This dynamic is what we call representation. As Webb puts it, we live immersed in representation. It is how we understand our environments and each other. It is also how we both are and how we understand ourselves. Representation is implicated in the process of me becoming me. A good example to that is how women is usually represented in media as housewives, which if you would look around in our university as a community, you would find that number of women working in the university is equal, if not more, than the number of men. Though women learn what it means to be me from their families, but how the society as a whole see it would be through the stereotypes, which makes it quite difficult for many to choose differently. People already have a certain expectation of who you should be and how you should act, and one would be under the pressure of living up to that expectation. So these representations put pressure on us as individuals in the ways we express ourselves. The idea that a woman is the one capable of nurturing a child, not a man, I think we all know is quite different now. Men can nurture their children too. We have seen families where men are the ones staying at home taking care of the kids, while the mothers are the bread earners. Stereotypes like the woman is either the perfect Madonna, a perfect nurturing mother, or the whore show a deep contrast in people's ideologies and culture. Men would take the virgin home and still dream of the whore, and that was a contrast first proposed by Freud. He spoke of something called a binary opposition. It's either one or the other. Binary opposition is a key concept in structuralism, a theory of sociology, anthropology, and linguistics that states that all elements of human culture can only be understood in relation to one another and how they function within a larger system or the overall environment. Binary oppositions are embedded in our culture. It is how relationships are created between different groups of people, for instance, upper class and lower class, or disabled and non disabled. Though these are stereotypes of both groups of people, but they also represent them as binary opposites with the underlying notion that they cannot coexist. The problem with a system of binary opposites is that it creates boundaries between groups of people and leads to prejudice and discrimination. One group may fear or consider the opposite group a threat referred to as the other. The use of binary opposition in literature is a system that authors use to explore differences between groups of individuals, such as cultural, class, or gender differences. Authors may explore the gray area between the two groups and what can result from those perceived differences. This has been represented in media again and again. Representation tells us who we are and how we are meant to behave. You can compare to Be a Lady, They Said by Paul McLean featuring Cynthia Nixon. It is a powerful 3-minute video that aims to highlight the daily pressures and unattainable expectations placed on women. It is narrated by Cynthia Nixon. You can look it up. It contains all the mediated messages that is a representation of women, which is most of the time contradictory. They are mediated to us through a system, the system of the mass media. They are reflected on us on how we interact with each other and in our own interactions with ourselves, trying to understand how we behave. If you look at the current slide, you will find a list of how we see the nerds and geeks. As you see here, some of these definitions cross boundaries. The nerd is seen as being only interested in academics but also introverted. On contrast, the geek is not. These are simplified narrative about groups of people and affects how we see others and how we see ourselves. However, being able to see an image of yourself reflected to you in the media can have good effect on people's lives. This slide has an example of that. It is a quote of Whoopi Goldberg. She says, "Well, when I was 9 years old, Star Trek came on. I looked at it and I went screaming through the house. Come here, Mom. Everybody, come quick. There is a black lady on television and she ain't no maid." I knew right then and there I could be anything I wanted to be. And of course, she played a role on Star Trek The Next Generation. This representation of Black women evolved over time. The representation inspired other Black women to try to work as astronauts, for example. We need to understand this as creators of content. This is the reason we need to get the representation right. In Jenny Kidd's Reader on Representation, she offers the reader 5 ways of theorizing representation. We're going to talk about 2 of these over the next week, which are representation and myth and representation and identity politics. Finally, we live in Africa, but we don't know much about it. Most of what we know was mediated to us through movies and television. The concept of Africa has become a story or a media narrative in the movie Black Panther. In your groups, make a meeting for yourselves and read the 2 articles on Moodle that discuss the movie, The Black Panther, and do a little bit of research on the movie. The first article is Black Panther and the Invention of Africa, and the second is Black Panther offers a regressive neocolonial vision of Africa. Then answer the questions on the slide here. What are the connotations of the title Black Panther? What myths are being perpetuated in the articles? Which article do you agree with more and why? What is the media narrative surrounding this film? Where did it originate? How did it spread? Thank you for listening and see you in class.